back. We haven't streamed in a few weeks. We had other things going on. Just didn't have time to get together and do our regular stream. Thank God we are back. There's not too much political commentary, so it was unclear what we talk about.
The month of Elul, as well as the building up to the holidays, definitely it's a time for self-reflection and positive insight.
Okay, apologize, trying to get my sound right and getting a little buzzing in the background. I apologize about that. Hopefully I'm going to be able to fix that. But yeah, we figure we talk about Elul, the coming Jewish holidays, and Rosh HaShana coming up, the Jewish holidays. And I apologize, I haven't streamed in a few weeks, so I just want to make sure my technology is right. Hopefully people could hear me all right, and try to figure out why I got this buzzing. But, you want to say some opening thoughts on Rosh Hashanah, Elul?
Yeah, it's an exciting time of year because, as the year comes to end, we have a lot of time to reflect about what path we have been on, excuse me, and as well as what our future entails. Especially, we have a highlight and then we have a moment of scrutiny. And the highlight is the New Year, which is Rosh Hashanah, and the moment of scrutiny is Yom Kippur, which literally, according to the Jewish faith, judgment is present. So let's talk about that, dude. Enlighten our audience to the aspects of the celebration and then the scrutiny via judgment on Yom Kippur.
Yeah, so just precursor. This is this last Sabbath was the beginning of the month of Elul, the last month of the Hebrew year. The Jewish calendar system has 12 months, lunar months, but in order that the holidays appear the same time every year, 7 out of 19 years are leap years where a whole extra lunar month is added in, like as opposed to Islam, where the calendar loses 11 days each year and the time of the holidays change. The Jewish holidays use this insertion of an extra month 7 out of 19 years. So the holidays generally are the same time. This year was a leap year, meaning that there were 13 months in extra Adar that was inserted. But the Jewish year starts with Tishrei, which will be at the end of September. And the last month, the various holidays appear, like, Passover is in Nisan. Elul, there's no holidays in. It's the preparation month for Rosh Hashanah. So straight in Moses.
Somebody said hello.
Yeah, J.M. Ridisheli, thanks for coming in.
Definitely. Hello. How are you?
Viewing from the beginning. I'm not sure you got a trial, whatever that is. Good luck with that. We'll talk about that a different time. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So just the precursor on what Elul is for those people unfamiliar with the basics of Judaism and the calendar. The third day of creation, God creates the stars and the sun and the moon and the stars in the heaven, and it says that should be a sign for us when the holidays are. The first commandment that the Jewish people are given is to declare the new moon, and later when we're revealed to certain holidays, one of the holidays is the New Year. And Moses says that there's a certain element with the judgment of the whole world. The whole world stands in judgment where God reviews and deals with everything that we've done in the previous year, makes a judgment based on our actions, and will make a decision for what's going to be for the next year. And we're referred to as being inscribed in the book of life. If you have
True.
Jewish friends, say, may you be inscribed in the book of life. And so that, this metaphoric understanding of God having this kind of like book of life that all our deeds are recorded in, and proclamations made for what's going to be in terms of how much money are we going to make, how much health are we going to have, what type of networking connections, and all the various factors that God controls will be judged. So the month of Elul is known as a preparation for judgment. The last month of the year, for deeply religious people, the whole month should be spent in preparation for this ultimate judgment. And the holiday season has Yom Kippur, so you have the original Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the new year, and then you have the metaphor given is that the book were written into the book on Rosh Hashanah. On Yom Kippur, the book is sealed, and on Sukkah, the last day of Sukkah, the festival of tents, that is sent out. So there's a process of judgment. So it's not just a one-time day. There's a whole holiday season of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkah.
Let me jump in there. For our audience, the thing I like to highlight about the Jewish lifestyle is that Judaism originally started off as an agricultural, agri-society. So organizational or congregational Judaism is a later introduction, but for people that's all along, so to speak, you definitely have a participation, even if you all by yourself, with the elements around you. Like, you can feel the aspect of the moon, the stars, the earth. The Shabbos day itself is based on like vibrational frequencies and a day of total rest. So even if you don't have a large group of people, like it's prescribed that 10 people should be in any prayer ritual, but like the aspect of ritual is so overlooked in today's Western context. People think it's about prayer, but study is preferable to prayer, and I only can, equate that to enlightenment, like the study of Torah is more important per se than the aspect of prayer. So you can jump back in and do it.
Yeah, I'm just going to unplug the mic and plug it back in. I hope I feel like there's a little buzz in the background. Hopefully. Okay, that should be all right. So hopefully, people will tune in. So as Rosh Hashanah comes closer, we'll talk. Hopefully, we'll be able to stream and talk more about it. But Elul, we figured just talk about the repentance process. The realignment. If you're a believer in the sense, like a strong God believer and believe in the spiritual system laid out by the sages, that there is actually this, this one day where God sits in judgment that is determinative of what's going to happen the whole year. First, culturally, Rosh Hashanah is very popular. Your average Reform Jew, only goes to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's the main holiday of the year. It's a gathering. It's a happy holiday. Historically, we have certain elements of the day, like blowing the shofar, the ram's horn that's commanded in Moses and supposed to be a call towards repentance. There's certain temple offerings. There's special prayers added, and but from we try to focus on the self-improvement process of preparing ourselves for judgment, trying to become the best people that's possible, and the various techniques that the sages have given over for how do you repent, how do you realign yourself with God, and your preparation for judgment. That judgment is coming. We know our court date is coming up, and it should be a happy day. There's a certain fear element because the prayers that we actually talk about is very harsh. Saying God determines sickness and health, life and death, prosperity and failure, and all these things, and saying, okay, maybe God's gonna look at us and be like, you're messing up, you're screwing up, you deserve punishment. I'm sorry. That's you know what the rules were, you broke them, and now it's time to be punished. So there's a certain repentant, I'm sorry, I really tried hard, and I'm sorry that I'm falling short, and want to be a better person, and should be contrite, appearing before God, knowing that we're falling short, but also an excitement of, God loves us, God created this day, and coming with Yom Kippur, a chance for the atonement for sin. Say, okay, you messed up, but you could clear your record, so to say, that all of our shortcomings for the year could somewhat be like, you say, okay, you messed up, but it's been forgiven, and we'll be able to move on, and God will bless us. So there's also, the seriousness of the fear factor of the fear of sin and punishment for sin, and the fear that when we're directly in front of the King, in front of the King of Kings and God, and He could see through all of our nonsense and our lies, and just be like, "You're messing up. I'm sorry. Time for the punishment." That's why there's a whole process and preparation. But at the end of the day, Rosh Hashanah is a happy day, a celebration, because we believe that God loves us and believe that God wants the best for us and a bright future for us.
Right. What's a very interesting culture is that a lot of people really don't understand what the whole concept of Jewish culture is about. Some suggest that these are carryovers from even more ancient holidays, especially on a ritualistic aspect. The Jews spent plenty of time in Babylon and Syria, as well as the ancient land and Egypt, so like whatever the host culture was at the time, like there were certain practices that were adopted from these particular host cultures. So, Duvi, you could explain more in the aspect, what is originally Jewish and how did the whole concept of Jewishness come to be?
Yeah, I mean, the origins of the Jewish people, according to the Judaic system of belief, regardless of culture, people who are culturally believing in Judaism, even possibly Orthodox Jews who follow all the ritual and the sages, versus the theological understanding that the world was created under a certain pattern. This was laid out by Moses when the Jewish people were taken out of Egypt and given the Torah, and God gave us these laws and revealed to us that there happens to be this special day that God, is the New Year, and not just like the New Year that goes from 5,778 to 79, but an actual day where God makes an accounting of the world. And according to the sages, Rosh Hashanah is not just the judgment of the Jewish people. The New Year is the judgment of everything, the judgment of all of humanity, and the judgment for things like the weather, and the judgment for all life and animal and plant creatures, that this is just how God designed the world, that there's a factual element that this is the celebration of the creation of the world. This is the history. If you're a young earth creationist who believes that the world, like the Bible says, is 5,779 years old, this is coming up, Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of it. And when God created the world, it was in line with the system of creation, of karmatic spiritual processes, that it all comes to a head on this day.
Right, and I agree, because, back to what I said earlier, is that the concept of synchronicity with nature is pivotal in the oversight of understanding what the rituals is all about. And for better words, God gave man a guide, even in the Garden of Eden from Adam, it was a roadmap set out in front to be like, if you obey and follow my lead, then you should enjoy all the benefits that path entails, versus venturing out by yourself and learning through trial and error. And that's the whole concept of judgment, because it's very scary in a way, because we all know people and have friends and family, but in the course of life, even in the course of a year, usually somebody is not going to make it to the next year. And that's a thought that we all have to keep in our heads to check our actions, because eventually that's going to be us. So therefore, the Jewish concept of judgment for my understanding, and for me, is a lot more vivid and in your face. It isn't a one-time deal. It's an ongoing deal.
Yeah, and the process, I remember two famous rabbis that met. It was saying, like, talking about one group prayed relatively shortly and one prayed very long. It was asking, like, well, do you pray very long, at least on the high holiday? And the rabbi kind of went, like, well, like, every day is like Rosh HaShana. Like, every day, you should feel the presence of, God, the judge, in us, and have the awe of God, that every tiny action that we do matters. But possibly besides for sages or the very righteous people, that's near impossible. And even for the righteous, it's very, very impossible to say, like, I'm going to be on perfect behavior 24/7 every day of the year. And there's a continuing improvement process where it's hard to know what it means to be a good person. The law is complex. People are born children into ignorance, and so on and so on. That God, in ultimate wisdom, designed the calendar in a way that there's a period of accounting, a period of reckoning, a period of forgiveness. And people who take the Jewish calendar seriously, at the beginning you say, Elul, right now is time for the preparation for this judgment, time to say, like, are we on the right track? And if you're a believer, and the old sages will give examples like meeting the king, like society's structured in a different way, but he's saying, you have an appointment with the king coming up. You make preparations because the king is a very busy person, or the information level that the whole months, and there's also certain writings like the king is in the field, and God has a certain openness, like the example in the Zohar says the king is in the field and approachable. So during the month of Elul, it's very easy to approach God and kind of saying, like, well, help me out here, God. Like, I want to be a good person. Like, people who follow Duvid regularly know, it's hard to be a righteous person in an unrighteous world. It's very difficult to make decisions. Like, me and Deshaun have talked multiple times about, politics. Maybe we'll talk, more about local things like Rashida Tlaib and the immigration protest. And God forbid, the fractures and possibly coming civil war within the Jewish community. It's very difficult to know what it means to be a good person, what it means to do the right things. A lot of decisions, you say, I tried my best, I looked into it, and I made a decision, and maybe I was wrong. And sometimes we try our hardest and we fail. And so God has the attribute of being merciful, and we believe God loves us and wants the best for us. But you need that constant reckoning. People who follow me on YouTube, like, purpose, progress. What's the purpose of this conversation? What are we accomplishing by doing this? And so I'm always very purpose driven, and that largely comes from my Jewishness. And I mentioned to Church of Entropy, I stream with regularly. Like, we've been doing the Week in Review almost a year now, and I said Week in Review is essentially a Judaic concept based on our religion.
Can I jump in for a second?
Well, just finish up by saying that the concept of, like, a week in review, a reconciliation period, likely comes from Moses in the Jewish calendar, of these concepts of the year in review, where you have this yearly judgment day.
Right, and I agree 100%. Like, this is a constant reminder to check yourself, because it's a short span of time before judgment rolls around each year, and I don't want to be the contributor of chaos or bringing somebody else harm, because quite naturally that same harm that I bring to other people is coming back to me. And it feels good to make the right decisions, to know that I'm grateful that I didn't do X, Y, and Z. Just because I have the power to do something doesn't mean that I should do it. And this is what that constant reminder is about, to know that you have to give an accounting. When inventory is taken, it's not so fun to deal with, like, when we do whatever we do in secret. So therefore, having made the right decisions puts one at ease, in a sense, because it doesn't become burdensome, because not everybody's going to make it, each year. And like I said earlier, eventually all of us that are living are going to be the person that doesn't make it. But with much, prayer and ritual preparation, we could continue to live a successful life, because, the transition out is just like the transition in, it's all ritually based, and, I don't want things weighing me down because each infraction is basically like a little small weight. And, therefore, through prayer and meditation, there's hope because once you free up your conscience and, turn from whatever you're doing, it becomes more of a confident relationship. Like ritual becomes a thing like exercise. You can, use it to strengthen yourself. So that's basically what I wanted to share.
Yeah, so maybe we could divide this into a few different aspects and just say, okay, once you're avowed to the process, that's a good start where you're saying, okay, I want to be a good person. I want to serve God. I want to do the right thing. And I take time out of my schedule to pray, to meditate, to study Torah, to study wisdom, to listen to the sages, and try to align myself with proper behavior. And so once a person is avowed to that process, that's a good sign, as opposed to a person, God forbid, say, is not avowed to that process. And then once you're avowed to the process, it's a continual self-improvement, because a person could see kind of this ideal society, this messianic era, or the ideal functioning of a person, and see how distant we are from that, or possibly looking at high achievers, looking at the sages, looking at the great rabbis, and looking at all that they accomplished, and then seeing how distant we are in our own accomplishments from that, and saying, well, God, how is it possible that I could self-actualize in the manner of the sages? And then there's also the aspect of specifically Jewish law, because Rosh HaShana, to put it in kind of like a secular Jewish, Reform Jewish, generic, like self-improvement, self-actualization, spirituality, versus kind of like a pure Judeo-Halakhic, where we have books and laws and prophets that clearly delineated what it means to be a good Jew, gave us rituals, gave us clear commandments, gave us dietary laws, in a way that it's basically impossible to not fall short of all of the requirements that Moses, the prophets, and the sages put upon us. And so it's those two aspects of say, I do believe in Moses, I do believe in the sages, the halakha, the rabbis, and I would like to have my life in line with the halakha, even though it's very difficult to do. And then also on the greater level of I want to be a good person, I want to make the world a better place, I want to have harmony between me and my fellow man, and I'm a believer in repair the world, tikkun olam, and the various aspects. That's an important part. Both of those are important parts where you could be like, okay, you did a lot for the world, you're a good person, you pray, but what about the observance of the Jewish ritual? Did you fall short? Did you say the prayers? Did you put on tefillin, wear your tzitzis, and all these various rituals that are commanded upon us in the halacha? Verse also, well, what did you do to make the world a better place? What about all the disputes and the anger and the jealousy and bad character traits and the possible pain that we cause to our fellow creations? So it's important. In Hebrew, they call it bein adam lamakom and bein adam lechaveru, between man and God, and between man and fellow man. And both of those are key aspects. And generally, it's said that you need to make harmony between yourself and fellow man. God can't forgive you for wronging a fellow man. If, God forbid, you owe someone money or you've harmed another person, you have to make a restitution. You can't pray to God, please forgive me for the harm I did to that other person. You need to make restitution. And in that sense, that's why it takes such a process to, I want to be non-harmful, I want to be beneficial to society. How do we go about doing that? And then also the aspect of how do I be in complete compliance with the Jewish ritual? How do I connect to God on a prayer and spiritual level? How do I master the prophets and the sages and the holy texts?
You know, the comment that I really want to share with the audience is that within the context of Jewish prayer in the morning, there's a specific prayer to say, keep me away from evil and ruthless opponents, if they be members of the tribe or not. Judaism is really one of the only religions that scrutinizes and condemns its own subjects for wrongdoing. Like, just because you're a Jew doesn't give you a pass to break the law. And it's all types of various levels and degrees involved. Like it says clearly in the writings, the book of Solomon, King Solomon states that a righteous person should fall 7 times and arise, but the wicked should be destroyed after one situation, you know. So intent matters heavily, you know, like what the intent behind the action is just as important as the action itself, because things done out of ignorance is more excusable. It's not right, but you could be excused versus when you have full knowledge. So that's why it's the constant checking of oneself, because, you know, Judaism isn't a pleasure sense religion. You know, Judaism is anti-pleasure sense, because just because it feels good, it could be totally morally abhorrent. So I just wanted to put that out there because, you know, things become complex in the various levels and degrees. You know, like one person that knows more is held to a different standard than the person that doesn't have that same knowledge.
Yeah, I'm found the chat like between Oliver D and Ultra T, and I'm giving you the classical understanding of Judaism laid down by the sages in the religion. That there are anthropological, or obviously the critics of Judaism, or the theorists who claim that what's in the prophecy in the Bible isn't true. But that's not what I'm laying down. And to some extent, there is a Jewish culture that Rosh Hashanah is a part of a Jewish culture, whether you're a believer or not. And there's benefits to the holiday that are applicable to all people. Mm-hmm. And it's our tradition. And even if, like, okay, what did Moses, what was Moses, the historical Moses or type things, that's beyond the purview of what we're discussing here. Because, I'm mm-hmm. talking about within the framework of me and Dishan, right, who are believing Jews who celebrate these holidays.
Exactly. And, as of late, this concept has come about that really just drives me up the wall. Like, people use terminology like Jews of color, but in Judaism, there's no specific color, gender, or cultural role. Like, this beautiful doctrine that was given to us at Mount Sinai and came down is for all people. So basically, the standard is to be applied across the board, and there's no such thing as any race or color involved. Like, it drives me up the wall when people say Jews of color. Like, there are Jews that have color, just like you have people in Europe who are Jews that worship the same God and believe the same scripture. So I just think that is a late development, and it's kind of a misnomer, in my opinion.
Yeah, we could switch to talking kind of, Jewish politics and greater things, but I want to give a perspective. This is the religion. Like, me and Dishan are Jews who are approaching God, the world, and our community, as any Jew does. Rosh Hashanah is coming, Judgment is coming. It's time to make a reckoning and be better people. And there might be dynamics within the community and things that are happening, or people are all flawed, even the best among us. And that's not relevant to our relationship with God and our relation to the community. Like, whether we're on good terms or bad terms, anybody watching this, if you're on good terms or bad terms with your local community, the holiday still applies. Whether you find a local synagogue, Chabad house, or you just, if your only access to Judaism is this show, you're saying Rosh Hashanah, September 30th is the new year, and it's worthwhile to start to contemplate on how to become a better person, to get in line with the spiritual, with our relationship with God, and on that day to focus that day of Rosh Hashanah, coming September 30th, to returning to God, and so I'm going to set aside a day to focus on my relationship with God.
And yeah, that's a beautiful point, through it, because the Hebrew Bible is a very beautiful text. The Tanakh, one of the minor prophets, Malachi, said that even a person that is a classic pagan, if they worship their God with the right intent, that the one God will accept that. So Judaism is non-discriminatory in its approach, and intent matters more so than anything I can totally think of at this particular point in time. And it feels good because with the right intentions, you have a chance. And it becomes a point in time where one has to become totally real with oneself, because you can't fool yourself. We can lie to each other, we can mislead each other, we can tell half truths and misinformation, but at the end of the day we still stuck with ourselves. So just reading the different texts and situations that it apply to definitely shapes one with the ability to be a free and clear thinker. And that's one of the real gifts I can say of this time of year, because everything is considered and taken into account.
Yeah, so let's give some practical advice for how to approach Elul. From the halachic perspective, basically, we blow the shofar at the end of the morning prayer service, and we add in Psalm 27 into the prayers. And then 10 days before Rosh Hashanah Sephardim, the whole month of Elul, Ashkenazim 10 days, the week before Rosh Hashanah, will add what they call slichos, which are added supplication to the prayers, and that's part of the ritual for those who follow the halacha. But generally, the recommendation is to dedicate more time to learning Torah, to praying, to things like chanting psalms or various prayer that whatever it is that you connect to most in Judaism or to God, that in this period of time approaching the new year, to try to increase that. If that's the new books on Judaism that I've bought, and I've been studying other things, Hinduism, consciousness, science, that it's saying this is Elul, I'm going to put aside this time that I'm spending on other stuff and really focus on my Torah study, and certainly trying to minimize dispute with people, recognizing that if we've had dispute with people, that we do not want to carry this over into the next year, and starting whole month now to start thinking, what disputes do I have with other people, and moving forward over the next few weeks, can I resolve those disputes? Is there anybody I owe an apology to? Is there anybody that I've wronged and that I've maybe been holding in my heart a hard heart and saying yeah, he deserved it, and it's no one deserved to be treated like that, I'm sorry, type things, or people you owe money to or something, time to pay them back, or various restitution, and that factor, that's the generally best way. Increase your learning, increase your prayer, increase the introspection, and start making those changes now. That's why don't wait till Rosh Hashanah to think I should do this and I should do that. Start thinking about it now. Start implementing those changes, so that when Rosh Hashanah comes, when you meet the king, and say I know I messed up. I know I did a whole bunch of bad things this year, and I've already started changing. Look what I've done over, God forbid, if someone was in prison and they have their parole hearing or something like that, saying look at all that I'm doing right now, that in recognition of what I've done wrong in the past, that makes me worthy of a positive judgment. So not alone that I'm just going to wait till that day and lay it all on the table that day. That's why we have a whole month of preparation. I don't know if Dishan wants to share any insights or strategy of how to prepare for Rosh Hashanah. Practical tips.
My strategy is that I just slow everything down, think before I act on anything, and definitely just be clear about my intent, because I don't want to knowingly offend anyone. And I just think that sometimes as a person, I have to play past situations and people just to reach a more positive outcome. Even though I can be in the right totally, it's just not worth engaging somebody on a level where it's going to deduct from your energy and make you upset and off kilter. Like this month is about balance, so you want to definitely be in sync with nature as much as possible. Go outside, and just feel the air and look at the trees that provide you oxygen every day that is so overlooked. Start noticing what sustains you. Start noticing the people that are in your corner. Learn how to build better alliances with what sustains and loves you versus trying to fit into places and with people that we don't belong around.
Yeah, okay, so you want to talk a little politics, communal going on? So we haven't streamed in a while. The main thing we were focusing on, like Rashida Tlaib, the Jewish community, immigration, ICE protest, those have progressed. So, we reported live from that protest in Dearborn, and actually that protest was successful, and the Dearborn police canceled their contract with ICE. So in terms of that protest, it was successful in changing the policy of the Dearborn Police Department. The week after, there was actually a protest at the Holocaust Museum, and there were counter protests. Like a lot of the same Jews went and went in front of the Holocaust Museum and calling upon the Holocaust or the duty as Jews, more based on have been knowing what it's like to suffer, as opposed to somewhat based on our tradition, but more based on kind of like the Holocaust and being a persecuted minority, therefore standing up for other persecuted minorities. However, there were counter protesters that came also. The Proud Boys were there.
Hold on, Tom Anderson, hold that comment.
Yeah, so that was a few weeks ago, and there was big fissures in the Jewish community, and then they had a Take on Hate group in Dearborn, a big rally, and Rashida Tlaib was there, and Debbie Dingle and Andy Levin, and the ADL showed up, and the local rabbis showed up. So the status of immigration protest is still a big deal to large portions of the Jewish community. There's some portions pushing back. The counter protesters are saying, like, those are nothing like concentration centers. How dare you invoke the Holocaust in any terms of what's happening with immigration? So this debate has progressed, and the role of Rashida Tlaib is also a key issue here in this area. And I'll let Deshaun fill in what he thinks about this, or if he wants to first address Tom Anderson.
Well, first and foremost, since we're in the month of Elul, like ethics play a pivotal role in politics, and unfortunately, Rashida Tlaib within the African American community, to answer Tom Anderson's question, has a ethics problem because the community, by and large, in her district, that's 52% African American, don't stand behind her because she's too much of a new person, for better words. Like, she isn't historically representing the district in the way that it's been represented in the past. But like the outgoing person that occupied her space was just John Conyers, who was a long-standing, very familiar person. But I would like to talk more about the ethics issues, because I think that, besides pointing the fingers, these are going to be the issues that make or break Rashida Tlaib, as well as the city of Detroit and
the Jewish community.
Yeah, ethics across the board. Yes, yeah, everybody. So like,
it's almost like Civil War level within the Jewish community here.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying, because I don't think she can sustain her office being ingenuine to her constituents. Like, one in particular incident that I remember, and this is strictly from a political perspective, she mentioned she wanted to increase home ownership in the district, But before you can increase home ownership, you have to increase employment, because it, for better or worse, it's putting the cart before the horse. And those are the issues that are going to let people know just what her particular interests are. I don't think she has really a grassroots following within the 13th on a mass level. There are her core group of supporters that kind of got her by in the election. But as she becomes more prominent in the national press, it's going to bring more issues to be scrutinized within the district on the local level, because the local constituency isn't being served in the same way. And like Duva said earlier, like the inner conflict in the Jewish community, the majority of African Americans are totally neutral when it comes to Israel. Like, Israeli politics and issues really don't trickle down into the black Detroit community. So therefore, I think this can work very negatively against Rashida Tlaib to be lashing out at a foreign government and the people that's 7,000 miles away. So you want to pick up on that, do it?
Yeah, well, I wasn't even referring to her views on Israel, but to the coalition against the protest against deportations. And it would appear that, since the stream we did a few weeks ago, that Tlaib has picked up more support in the local Jewish community. At the events that the Open Orthodoxy group is now supporting Tlaib. The ADL has decided to support Tlaib, largely related to the immigration issue, and they might feel she has very limited power on Israel. So the whole thing with her being rejected, allowed to go to Israel, the Jewish community here, at least the democratic organizations, seem to be pointing in the direction that working together with her to stop ICE and deportations and be pro-immigration is more important than stopping her anti-Israel activities. And that would appear to be what's happening with the Jewish majority community on the left, where they're like, okay, a lot of Jews on the left like Israel, but they're willing to kind of okay, let Tlaib say bad things about Israel. What does it really matter? But when it comes to stopping immigration and deportations, she's becoming a loud voice and a leader in that movement, and the Jewish community is rushing to work together with her. So I mean, whether the African American community, how they're viewing her, I haven't seen any polling or don't have any insight. But I would say over the last few weeks that there's been more people within the mainstream left Jewish community that have decided to take her side.
Yeah, that might be true, but it was a prominent person in the African American community who used to be the press secretary for Mayor Dennis Archer, who was a very esteemed mayor in Detroit. Like Greg Bowens was the press secretary, and he was very critical about Rashida Tlaib's presence in the African American community, and says that basically she has a black problem, because
But ironically, she doesn't really have a Jewish problem, because the Jews have relatively, it's too dangerous for the Jews to oppose her. So her problems with the African American community and whether she's going to be able to win elections, re-election in the majority African American community, is yet to be seen. But certainly she appears to people who follow the stream. We talk a lot about racial things. In the current status in America is basically only white people could be racist. It's only wrong. I mean, racism is bad, whatever, but you could only be a hate crime if it's done by a white person, done by a non-minority. So in the Democratic community, there's really no platform for Jews, so to say, to punch left and attack Palestinians, or to call for the ousting of Rashida Tlaib. There doesn't appear to be any ears listening to that on the Democratic side. Obviously Debbie Dingell has rejected any calls to denounce Tlaib, and the Jewish community on the left has appeared to not not making continual calls, that it seems to be a lose-lose battle, and to try to oppose Tlaib. Whether the African American community, when it comes down to re-election, and the Jewish community could support her opponent and hope she doesn't get reelected, that's likely to happen. That someone primaries her, that the Jewish community will support her opponent. That's likely to happen. But till then, it seems that the obviously vast majority liberal Democratic Jewish community is probably going to work together, or certainly not be publicly criticizing her.
Well, that sounds fair. I just know at the last minute, inside the polling booth, people are going to vote their interests, and I'm not saying personally whether I like her or dislike her, but I'm just saying from a political perspective, like when you are a public office holder, you have to have a checklist and a to-do list of things that you must attend to. And if your constituents are feeling neglected, like this is any politician, then they're going to suffer some type of withdrawal and pushback. So like Duva said, it's yet to be seen. But it's more of a cool reception right now. Like the honeymoon phase is over. Like it was a first. A lot of people celebrated this on the progressive left, but at the same token, now that the business has begun, people are really starting to voice how they feel, and some of those voices are starting to matriculate up.
Okay, Tom's asking about. Let's finish up this topic, and then we'll move to just Detroit. Tom's asking about that. So you're just mentioning the general trend of polling historically is that Jews are obviously vast majority Democratic on the left, and the majority of Jews on the left don't put Israel as a big factor in their voting, and polling will show that the majority of Jews will support Democratic candidates even if they're anti-Israel. That does not appear to be a big enough factor, and there's a certain logic to it. You're saying like, well, Israel is strong. Like an American Jew doesn't need to base their vote on some interaction with a foreign government that is basically meaningless, because certainly on local, maybe on a presidential scale, but on local scale, whether a person supports or doesn't or is against Israel has almost no implications to the job at hand that they're meant to do. And for all the reason why the majority of Jews are on the left, that even being anti-Israel is not enough to turn Jews to the right, certainly to make them vote Republican, or even to like Elizabeth Warren or your different people that are making harsh criticisms of Israel. And you have some point that's what the American Jews want them to do, and even if they didn't, that it's unlikely that would shift the voting patterns. So the African American community, what they do, they have their own interest that may or may not be in line with the Jews, and that's. But her reelection is she up for reelection already in 2000?
No, I think 2020. She still has a year to go, because she won under contingency. It was a special election, so to speak. So therefore, like the airing out, and the realization that she's in office is still really adjusting itself. And African Americans are going to vote more based on race issues, and this is another point of contingency, because Rashida Tlaib isn't vocal enough when it comes to race issues. I don't think she's skilled enough to really address the historical fact of race-based politics. So therefore, I would say definitely she's at a historical disadvantage, to somebody that can actually expound on these issues, whether they be black or white.
Yeah, and then it'll become like the issue, like who could beat her. So even if she's weak, even if the majority African American community in her district, they have to find someone to to beat her, which may be prove to be more difficult than or there might be fissure within the African American community, because there'll be a primary battle where multiple African Americans run and split the vote.
Answer that question with Bob Paxton. He's like, how many baby mamas do I have? 0. I believe in being married, and it's a disgrace not to be married because it's not a good example for children to have a broken household, period, if it's not necessary. So, yes, Bob, 0.
So let's pivot to talking about Detroit. Tom Anderson, here you were here last time. What do you think it will take for Detroit to experience a renaissance? Will manufacturing ever provide the kind of boon it does? Ultra T, talking about the decline of the UAW. Me and D-Shot, God forbid, I was just saying, one of the kids that I coached chess got shot and killed this week. He was in his late 20s, but I remember when he was in high school and he went to University of Michigan, a top school, got a degree in architecture, and his neighbor had a home break-in and he tried to help them, and he got killed. Very, very sad, tragic event.
Right.
And I'm living in the suburbs. Deshaun actually lives in Detroit. It's tough to say. I believe in Detroit. I want Detroit to do well, but I'm not going to give false advertising. There's a lot of troubles here, and economically, you see the gentrification, the little bubble downtown that's been created of nice buildings and expensive apartments for the people who work in the very few sectors of the economy that's working. But Detroit's economy has huge problems, and the manufacturing boom, I say, they might have stopped the bleeding. Manufacturing was just falling off a cliff that looked like it was going to go to zero. After 2008 and 9, the Obama-Bush stimulus package, the bailing out of General Motors and Chrysler. Maybe they look like Chrysler and General Motors is going to survive. There was some of the factories stayed open, maybe 1 or 2 opened up, but it doesn't really appear like there's a manufacturing renaissance happening here. It's just that we stopped the bleeding. Although I would like to have a manufacturing resurgence. Next week we have the battery conference in the suburbs. I hope to live stream from it. There are a few good signs on Detroit, new shows, the battery show or technology shows, manufacturing expos. I think I did the foam expo. I did a few weeks ago, stream the robotics show. So there's definitely.
I got a comment. Detroit, the management replacement that has taken place is starting to show some signs of improvement. The key to a great city is great management. With the election of Mike Duggan to the office of mayor in the city of Detroit has led to a very good step in the right direction. The interior of Detroit is starting to get built up.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Did we just stop the bleeding and patch up our wounds? Or are we on the way to recovery, or is a renaissance coming in? That's unclear.
Well, eventually it's unclear.
Mayor Duggan stopped the bleeding and patched up the wound.
Well, yeah, but it was a phenomenon because nobody thought that a majority of black city would vote for a white mayor, and they did not because he was white, but because he was skilled and he had a reliable track record. He turned around the hospitals, the DMC, and see. That's what people look at, especially the conscious voters, the black slate themselves voted for Mike Duggan. And in my opinion, he has a job for life because Detroiters is not flip-flop about their mayors. Until he chooses to move on to a higher position, I think his job security in Detroit is really solid. People like Mike Ilitch and Dan Gilbert took chances, and then you got others that's coming in, like Gary Torgold just took management responsibilities of the former Cobo Hall, which is named TFC Center. So it's going to take a lot more of these type of guys to come reorganize and manage, fiscal management, on top of the other services that we provide, like manufacturing and other cottage industries that we have. So yeah, it's an issue of management that is primarily going to lead to the success or failure of Detroit, like it always has.
Well, there's the big structural problem like in terms of the blight, the population decrease, the boarded up houses. There's big debates in Detroit now. Like facial recognition technology with the police department to try to clean up crime but education is probably the big issue that hasn't really been helped. Like education was taken over by the state and years ago, and Detroit wants to get back in control of its education and the education received by Detroit's largely a black city, and the education received relatively for the majority of Detroit would be like a subpar education that's not enough to send people, enough people to university and to have stable, productive careers.
Well,
Saying that element of turning around education so that this gentrification. Okay, let's just have some sort of police state implement stop and frisk, cause gentrification, and force the black people out of Detroit so that we could get new people in is likely to fail. But the question, can we raise the black people in Detroit up that we're turning, like Ben Carson's, the universities like, Deshaun's at Wayne State, they have huge issues.
Graduated.
Yeah, he graduated, but it's saying they have huge issues recruiting African Americans, and it's like, okay, we could just recruit a bunch of people who want to come into Detroit and put them there, but what about the base of Detroit? Are we going to be able to raise them up? And from the educational standpoint, there has not been tremendous success, unfortunately.
Right,
and that's why, God forbid, like my star student, he wasn't a major student of mine, who got into University of Michigan, that rejects affirmative action. University of Michigan, does not do affirmative action for blacks, but he got in. He graduated in architecture, and he was shot and killed. He will not be able to benefit Detroit with all the work that he did.
Right, and Duvid, I'm with you on that 100% because Detroit has 6 or 7 schools that is in par with the best of the best in the nation. But out of those 6 or 7 schools, you don't really have a chance, And this is from the high schools to the junior high to the elementary schools. So it's a micro group. Like your student that was lost this week, what a waste, what a shame, what a tragedy. My former high school that I attended in the city of Detroit is actually one of the 7 choice schools. You have to have an entrance exam, like Bronx High School of Science in New York. It's an engineering school, Southeastern Tech. But yeah, it's just too few people that's getting that access to quality education. And, the parenting is shabby. You got too many kids in single parent households not getting the right structure or values. And it just continues to be a vicious cycle. And, I was fortunate enough to have a strong community around me, good support system. My mother literally made me do homework whether I had it or not. We didn't have a television in the house. If you wanted to entertain yourself, read a book, and that paid off. I come from a 2-parent household, so yes, exactly. But it's just not good because societal standards matter, cultural standards matter. How's your house being ran? Do kids stay up past a certain time on school nights? Do they have a nutritious diet? Who are the role models? It becomes a plethora of issues.
Yeah, in Detroit, because the state took over, Betsy DeVos is from Michigan, and she's been pushing charter schools forever. Detroit basically has the magnet charter school system, so there are good schools in Detroit, like Duvid's a chess coach, University Preparatory Science and Math, the high schools, Kaz Tech, King, Malcolm X. There are good schools in Detroit that if you go through the charter system and get selected for the better schools, that you're likely to be able to get ahead. But at the same time, the other schools are really not competitive enough. And so like within Detroit, people don't like the charter system because it leaves behind the masses, like the no one left behind. So like the kids I work with I work with anybody who comes to the chess club, but the majority of the people I work with are people who has successfully been able to enter the charter schools, and that they all take education seriously, and are enough to sit and listen to Duvid coach them chess or something like that, and um, so it's a big debate where certainly like people who follow me on YouTube know that the Detroit chess schools win the state chess championship basically every year, elementary, junior high, and high school, but those are majority charter schools, and is not necessarily indicative of tens of thousands of kids in Detroit that God forbid, unfortunately, are not going to have a good enough education to allow them to have a successful future here in America.
Yeah, that's sad because the curriculum has been watered down to the fact of being non-effective. It's a historical debate. Like education for me started at home. I knew how to read and write before I entered school per se. And I was in and out of public school versus private school. So definitely, I agree with you in a lot of ways that education is what matters. And who's entrusted with the responsibility to teach our children is still the $1,000,000 question because not everybody is qualified. Like the current state of mass education in cities like Detroit is deplorable. Like the materials is far behind the quality of any other school district in the state almost that I know of.
Yeah, I coach kids from Ben Carson Academy, and I don't. Betsy Davos, obviously is from Grand Rapids, but she was a big pusher of the charter school movement in the whole state in Detroit, and she's a very hated figure among, especially the Jewish community here, but the leftist community. She, God forbid, the Purim play of the Detroit, Jews for Justice. They made like Betsy Davos humming. She's the most hated figure imaginable. Although within the conservative African American community in Detroit, there is actually quite a bit of respect for Davos and the people who are successful through the charter system. And so it's a big question. I don't have enough expertise to say whether the charter system is a good or bad idea. There is an element of the African American community that certainly the ones that get their kids into the charter schools and their kids move on to be successful, that are fans of it. But generally, the greater Democratic community in Detroit is not a fan of Davos, is not a fan of the charter school system, and is extremely unhappy with the situation. But long term in Detroit, the educational system is significant in saying that okay, you might be able to import like a bunch of Indians, like Duvid's that Hare Krishna goes to Hindu temples, and there's thousands of Indians that have advanced degrees in engineering and computer programming that come into Detroit and work for Ford and General Motors and Chrysler. But our locals aren't filling those jobs. We're importing people from India to fill the jobs that the people who live here are not trained to fill. And gentrification, these issues, is the sustainability, the renaissance of Detroit, can it be based on importing people and leaving behind the majority of the people that live here? And that's unlikely.
Well, my opinion is that the African American community historically has been very conservative, and without structure, you really don't have a chance to succeed because an undisciplined person, especially children at that very impressionable age, usually carry those habits throughout life. And my mother was a strong disciplinarian. Like she didn't play games with bad talking and skipping school and bad grades and this, that, and another. So definitely, like, it was totally up to the parents, to implement structure in those houses. And that's why you have, if parents don't do their job, then the community suffers. We have to do the job. You see the juvenile delinquents and the this, that, and another, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. And I can't justify that. As a black man, that's a disgrace. And that's just the bottom line because
you're
I'm
not going to stand by
excuses.
and let them push your people. I mean, not your people. I mean, I'm a universalist. But like even as an, I'm not black, but I'm not going to stand by and watch them push the black people out and import a bunch of other people to replace them. And I mean, one, it's not going to work. Like two, it's not moral, it's not just. So there's big problems with the Renaissance of Detroit. Although the bleeding is largely stopped, crime is still a big problem. It's ironic that they're against, the level of freedom, the question like censorship. You have any comment on the facial recognition technology protest? That's probably one of the biggest
it's
issues right now
controversial
in Detroit.
Because a lot of people object because of civil liberties, but a lot of the older citizens of the city like police presence. They like the green light districts. I saw a man hug a police officer and said, "Thank you for being here." So, me personally, I don't have a problem with it because one way or another is usually not going to affect me because I don't have problems with the police. I'm on a different path. I'm a college educated guy. I hang out in different circles, and it's always an outsider that's highlighting an issue within the city. And back to what Duva said, it's a lot of people just giving people bad advice. Whether it's there or not, if people would had themselves in check, then it wouldn't be a need for all the tools that they imply, including facial recognition, which I could take it or leave it. But if it's going to stop people from committing crime, then I would say leave it.
Yeah, I mean, so we got our old friend now. He's Olaf talking about the whites who were pushed out of Detroit. So now it's like, okay, the blacks are going to be pushed out of Detroit, but it's like, it was like Detroit wasn't a black city. Detroit's only a black city because the whites were pushed out. So now we're saying like, oh, you can't push the blacks out of Detroit. What about the fact that the whites were pushed out?
That's a good question. Like it's called when communities transition and restructure themselves. The riots made everybody run from Detroit, so Detroit was left behind. But for the last 200 and some odd
years,
used
the word that the whites were basically pushed out.
They were. After the riots, it was a fact that it was white flight because it wasn't safe for white people to live in the city at that particular point in time. But everything has a cycle, like 100 or 200 year cycle. I'm speaking at least from 1900 up into 1967, which is over 50 years, not quite 100, but close to. And power changes hands, so therefore we returning back to our original base. And if Detroit happens to become a majority of white city, it really doesn't matter if you on the ball, who's there. It's as long as business is being taken care of. If you didn't prepare and educate yourself and network and connect with the people that can provide you some space and security, then it's something missing in that equation. You're going to be targeted because you're vulnerable. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, so I support multiculturalism, and I support Detroit being a sanctuary city, a haven for refugees, and for increasing the population back to historical levels. And Detroit could really absorb hundreds of thousands of people. However, I always say if you don't want to, if you don't like African Americans, don't come to Detroit. You chose the wrong city, and you have a lot of people that come to Detroit. Try to live in the separated, gentrified areas and largely avoid the African American community or business concerns. Saying you want to build luxury apartments or sell products that are out of the affordable range of your average Detroiter. You have to have an economic market that doesn't create some sort of police state that protects a gentrified downtown and leaves the rest of Detroit like a no man's land. That's going to fail. So Detroit, all peoples will have to rise together. There's no way that Detroit is going to rise without raising up the black community, and at least whites who were forced out of Detroit had some place to go. And saying blacks, to some extent, they don't have the same. They don't really have anywhere to go to be forced out of Detroit.
Yeah, that it's that comment is low. Is kind of a loaded statement because there are African Americans that are highly capable and are a part of the downtown landscape and do have money. Like statistically, Detroit is one of the wealthier black cities. Yeah, there are a lot of neighborhoods in the city where people were left behind, but not just whites abandoned them, but African Americans also got away from those undesirable elements and chose to live out in suburbs like yours, Duvid, where we are now. So yeah, it becomes a lot of other issues and it's multi-layered, but I can't be totally honest or fair and say that all of anything. I think everything is class-based, and even being a man that barely got through college financially, I got through because of my willpower and determination. Like I didn't have any special treatment at all. So basically, I'm not going to accept any excuses being made because if you want to go bad enough, you're going to work hard enough to stay in and do it.
Yeah, both of us believe in Detroit, but we're not giving false fantasy visions. To some extent, people come to Detroit because like it's cheaper, or maybe because because it's more difficult to succeed in other places. That less pressure, but there is a lot of opportunity here, and I'm encouraging people to check it out. We're promoting Detroit. Anyone who has any specific question for me or Deshaun, you just do an @Duvid in the chat. Is there anything you wanted to talk about we didn't talk about yet, or any points you wanted to add in?
Well, I just wanted to make the point that being a lifelong Detroiter, pretty much, at a majority white university in the city that I attended, major research university, my official record and transcript is so clean and above average that my haters never really had a chance to see me fail because, actually I finished up my education early and I might have missed 2 or 3 days out my whole stay at the university because, I take education that serious. I haven't forgot the lessons of the past. Martin Luther King, the Jewish community, everybody always invested in education. And like you said, Duvid, that same standard has to be reintroduced. So therefore, yeah, when all the smoke clears, the facts are only going to be there. And I'm happy to say that I won in that aspect.
Yeah, we've talked about this quite a bit. And I don't know how much you want to talk about it publicly, but you're graduating school, you have opportunities. You could have probably better chances of success with less things holding you back by leaving Detroit versus trying to stay and raise up Detroit, and possibly limiting the amount of success available to you, and you'll have to make those difficult decisions on your own. And so we talk about that constantly because it's difficult. Saying that it's very conceivable that a talented person would be personally better off by just picking up and using their talent someplace else.
True, because it becomes convoluted with the expectation of success is, and I'm just saying from things that I've personally encountered, like a lot of so-called far leftist do-gooders tend to have a certain prescripted ideal of what a black person or African American should look like, and when they meet guys like me or others that are similar to me, they find it contrary to their popular worldview, and that becomes problematic because failure is not part of the equation. So yes, it's a lot of class issues that's layered, and I truly believe in social safety nets and caring for those who are vulnerable and can't take care of themselves. But at the same token, I'm not into subordinate status, and that has to change because, I'm not willing to fight those fights anymore. Like Duvid said, it's time to go somewhere else, and sometimes that's what you have to do.
Yeah, well, I basically settled that my lot is going to be here in Metro Detroit, and regardless of opportunities I might have someplace else, and just to make the best of the situation, and like I'm locked here, regardless of even if the ship is sinking, saying I'm gonna God forbid have to go down with the ship.
Well, yeah, certain people feel like that, but at the same token, in my particular situation, for me to be most effective, I have to save myself, because if I don't save myself, then I can't save anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, people have the difficult decisions and situations, and there's a lot of success stories in Detroit, but we're struggling with a lot of problems, and someone who just wants to get ahead in life, generally Detroit might not be high on their perspectives, but if people are interested in social justice and social organizing or various fields, and ironically, like if the welfare state increases, you have things like medicine, or people come to Detroit to administer things like medicine because the government pays for it, and therefore you could you have all sorts of careers in the medical professions, and actually in Detroit and Michigan, hospitals have become some of the biggest employers in the state, largely due to government funding.
That is true.
So, anything else in the chat? Any comments, Tom? Thanks. Comment. Good to hear that you and Deshaun are helping to raise up Detroit. I mean, we're trying our best. Like Rosh HaShana, we opened up talking about our relationship as kind of like standalone Jews in here that are we're affiliated with the community, but we're not like really straight fits with the generic Jewish community. But we still have a relationship with God, with the holidays and Torah, and take Judaism seriously. It's Elul, Rosh Hashanah's coming, and we take life in God in Judaism seriously. And it comes to that we reflect about our own personal relationship with God, Bein Adam Lamakom and Bein Adam L'Chaveru, our relationship between man and fellow man, and the people we have dealings with, and our community at large. And bringing it back to Rosh Hashanah. Rebuke is a commandment, and helping out poor people is a commandment that we could be punished for. God forbid, you turned a blind eye to that person in their time of need. That's a sin. Or you had an opportunity to rebuke that sinner and let it go by, and that person's sin has been, God forbid, part of the punishment is put on, someone else, put on me, because I chose to just sit back and let them sin, as opposed to trying to pull them out of their sin or rebuke them. And so that's applicable no matter what community you're in. And being here in Detroit, it's an obligation of a Jew to raise up the community. People harp on the liberal Jews and Tikkun Olam. And Tikkun Olam, repair the world, is just a singular concept of leftist organizations. But there are elements within the straight halakha, within straight Moses, that are very clear that you're not a standalone person who just stands judgment before God. There's a collective judgment that includes the society, the neighborhood, the community you reside on, and you have an obligation to try to make that society better.
Right, I agree with that. But sometimes the best help that you can get is for people to stay out the way, because thanks,
it doesn't
but
mean
no thanks.
Protesting ICE. I'm saying if the greater Jewish community is trying to do that by protesting deportations or things like that. I go to a few of those. That's not how me and Deshaun try to improve our community. When we're involved, I'm a chess coach, or you see transportation or different events, zoning, civil engineering, things that are more likely have expertise or have more impact on the community by being involved in those issues.
Well, yeah, your expert
or even putting this show out.
Yeah, exactly. I just think everybody have to know exactly what their purpose is, and certain people who haven't quite found themselves tend to be the loudest voices at these protests. But I don't think that's just the best use of my time or my skill set. And like I said, thanks but no thanks, because you could do more harm sometimes trying to help in a reckless way than just stepping back and basically not doing nothing. So as we look from all perspectives.
Yeah, Tom's asking, we had said we were going to try to do some kind of show on buying real estate in Detroit. We'll have to look into that. That might be something more like I have to prepare and do presentation than just talking. But Tom is asking if we have time to talk about the water issue. I don't know if you have insight on that. What hit Flint is supposedly hitting New Jersey and Newark and different areas. Detroit has some serious water issues, like what happened in Flint, could conceivably happen in Detroit. There's water shutoffs where water is expensive and people don't get payment, and it goes off. So I'm not sure what aspect of the water issue you want addressed, or if you have any insight on it.
My opinion is that Flint was more of a socially engineered experiment. It could have been prevented, but across the nation, our infrastructure is crumbling. So, yeah, if the pipes and the old infrastructure is breaking down and lead contaminants are seeping in, that's more through just wear and tear. I think in general, Detroit is in more of a position to do something about it than other cities because we have one of the highest levels of fresh water, public fresh water in the world. So, we can section off our problem and repair our pipes and still be up and running. I don't know how New Jersey's structure is set up, but I think that basically it's time for infrastructure rebuilding in this country, from our roads to our water to our sewage systems to the way we consume energy. That would definitely be more helpful than just continuing to be doing things as business as usual.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like President Trump, when he was running in 2016, he even created like a little chant that said it used to be cars were made in Detroit and you couldn't drink the water in Mexico, and now cars are made in Mexico and you can't drink the water in Detroit.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which is unfortunate that the state. That's why as a civil engineer, I'm for increasing the population here in Detroit. It is based on infrastructure, that the population decline without a certain base of people. You can't keep the tax base. You can't keep the infrastructure base to keep things like the roads and the pipes and the police force and different things up and running. And hence Detroit needs population. And the whites who moved out of Detroit, the likelihood that whites are going to move back into Detroit, who knows? And whether so Duvid would say, okay, you could make Detroit a refugee city and let like a bunch of Syrians move here, or we'll keep on bringing like Indians and Chinese, or maybe a lot of the whites who left Detroit will come back. I don't know, but certainly, I think we need more population here. We need people, in probably even the realms of hundreds of thousands, to come back and live here in order to solve the water problem, because it's you have a critical mass of people that are necessary to maintain the infrastructure.
I agree 100%.
Okay, so it looks like there's some just personality conflicts from other streams being carried on in the chat here. Not too many comments directly related to what me and Dishan are talking about, but we're glad that you tuned in. I guess we'll make our final remarks. If people have a last question, they could ask it. Your final statements.
Well, just keep on using your minds, guys. It don't hurt or cost to think, and that's what I would like to share, is that let's just continue to be a thinking society, a society that is out here, that is aware and definitely know how to move. So that's basically my final thoughts. Is just keep your thinking caps on.
Yeah, this is Elul. This is your reminder. Take life more seriously, and there's a little bit of fear complex, in here, like life is passing me by. I'm not getting done what I'm supposed to, but also like a happiness. There is a God who created us and loves us, and the New Year is coming up, and you could ask God, and God might say yes, and so we're going to try to take our life more seriously, be involved in more activity, and learn more Torah, and try to be better people, and hopefully God will answer our prayers, and there'll be good blessings and things for everybody.
Shout out to Tom Anderson. We appreciate you too, bro. Keep up the good work as well.
Okay, so blessings, everyone. I guess we're gonna sign by like Super T. Like me and Dishan have the same rabbi. When we go to all different type rabbis, but the Detroit synagogue went forward in the direction they went forward to. And that was their decision that they did through democratic processes, and we're on relatively good terms with her and the people in the congregation, even though that might not be representative of the style of Judaism that we personally desire to practice. So take care, everyone. Have a great week, and maybe we'll be back next week. You got the Democratic debates, so if that's interesting, that creates interesting things to talk about. Hopefully, next week we come back and talk more politics, and we'll try to add in a little bit more, about spiritual message, self-improvement related to the Jewish holiday season.
All right, have a great night, guys. You know that.